So let's talk about some of the elements that make a camp shirt a camp shirt. The camp shirt has its origins in many different parts of the world, from the Caribbean to the Hawaiian Islands. It's always a casual-looking shirt. With a straight hem, it's meant to be worn untucked, generally short sleeves, a one-piece collar, and often there's a button loop at the top so that the shirt can be closed, giving it a more formal look. Camp shirts can be sewn in a wide variety of fabrics, from solids to color block two-tone bowling shirts to tropical prints that you'd find in an aloha shirt. This is the shirt that we're going to be sewing together in class. The collar is sewn directly into the shirt itself. My camp shirt happens to have a left breast front pocket, which you'll often find. Sometimes there are pockets on both sides, sometimes there are no pockets at all. Something else that camp shirts always have are front facings instead of front plackets. But the facing serves the same purpose. It's to reinforce the fronts of the shirt so that we can put our buttonholes on the left side of a men's shirt and our buttons on the right side. Now let's get to some of my favorite parts, choosing our pattern, and even better, choosing our fabric. If you've ever read my blog, Male Pattern Boldness, you know that I'm a big fan of vintage patterns and have a very large pattern stash. Here are some of my patterns through the decades, from the 1940s and 50s, 1960s, 1970s and 80s, up through contemporary times. Remember that the camp shirt is really a vintage look, so there's nothing wrong with choosing a vintage pattern if you could find one in your size. One of the great things about vintage patterns is that they tend to be in one size only. So if you're lucky enough to know your size, you can buy that size and not have to worry about tracing your size on a multi-size pattern. When I was researching camp shirt patterns, I noticed that some of the more contemporary ones will sometimes lack the back yoke. My preference is always to have a back yoke because it helps with the fitting in the back. There are so many good pattern options for camp shirt patterns, vintage and contemporary, and in your class materials you'll find some recommendations of mine. Either way, whatever period your pattern is from, the construction process is always going to be the same, as will the pattern pieces. The pattern that I chose to make my shirts from and that we're using in the class is this vintage Butterick from the early 1960s. It's really just like all the others, but I like the fit and I like the pattern. The camp shirt is a very loose-fitting shirt. But if you haven't sewn menswear before, you're still going to want to take some basic measurements. The most important measurement is your chest circumference, because that's going to determine your size. Camp shirts are almost always sized small, medium, large, and so on. Because a camp shirt neck is usually worn open, the neck circumference is not as critical as it would be in a men's dress shirt. Camp shirt sleeves often have too much ease, like many commercial men's shirt pattern sleeves. The way I handled this on my camp shirt was to draw two parallel lines toward the sleeve cap, 3/4 of an inch apart, and I simply fold out that 3/4 inch of extra ease that I didn't need. The length is something that can be easily addressed either by folding up the hem at the bottom of the shirt, or many commercial patterns will have a horizontal line marked lengthen here, shorten here, that you can use to customize the length of your shirt. For this class, I made 3 different versions of the camp shirt in 3 wildly different fabrics. In this beautiful cotton floral, I really focused on matching the pattern across the front, because as you can see, there's a very well-defined diagonal on the pattern. Now this is the shirt that we're going to be sewing together in the class. This is a cotton rayon blend, and it's a twill very much like denim, and it has the texture of Swiss dots. So this is also a pattern that I wanted to match across the front. And I also, of course, wanted to match the pocket, and we're going to do that together. Now this is a true tropical print in a beautiful orange linen. When I laid out the fabric, I really couldn't even see the repeat of the pattern easily, so I knew that matching my pattern across the front and at the pocket was not as critical. I really didn't do any pattern matching whatsoever, but I don't think you can really tell. When I cut the pocket, I wasn't even trying to match the pattern, and really you can't even tell. Now I want to show you some fabric examples from my own fabric stash of fabrics that I think would be ideal for a camp shirt, and some fabrics that would probably be best to avoid. First, I'd like to show you some fabrics that I think would be great. This large scale check would make a beautiful camp shirt, and you could do some nice pattern matching across these very bold black lines. How about this vintage 1940s fabric that I found at my local flea market with these really great images? I think this fabric dates back at least to the 1940s. And as you can see, the images are mirrored on either side, so you could do some really great pattern matching here. So this is a very beautiful cotton lawn bird print. But as you can see, the birds are all lined up vertically. So you would definitely want to do some cool pattern matching with that. In fact, you could line up the images vertically or even do something horizontal if you wanted to for a different look. And finally, we have a classic gingham check. This would make a great camp shirt. On a small scale print like this gingham, you wouldn't need to do too much pattern matching. Next, I'd like to show you some fabrics that I don't recommend for a camp shirt. It's not that there's anything wrong with the fabrics themselves, they're just simply not suited to a men's shirt. Now this is actually home deck fabric. It's cotton chintz and it has this glazed look to it, and it's very, very stiff. You would certainly not want to wear a shirt made out of this fabric, even if you liked the print. Now, while I happen to love this vintage 70s bicentennial print, it's cotton canvas, it's very stiff, and you would not want to wear a shirt made out of a fabric this stiff. However, it would be great for a pair of jeans. Next, this is a really beautiful cotton voile, and it's a cotton silk blend. But can you see how transparent it is? Because camp shirts have front facings, if I were to make a facing in this fabric, it would show clearly through the front of the shirt. You'd probably see other things as well that you might not want to. So this is not recommended for a camp shirt. Finally, this is a polyester stretch jersey. Even though this is a really fun fabric, the patterns that we're using have been drafted for stable woven fabrics and not knits. This would be better suited for a wrap dress or even swimwear. As far as choice of fabrics goes, on the back of every pattern envelope, there's always a list of recommended fabrics, and it's never a bad idea to follow those. That said, you can make a camp shirt out of everything from vintage bark cloth to silk twill. So be creative and think outside the box. Let's talk a little bit about pattern matching. Now, in a fabric where there's a very obvious repeat of the design elements, that's generally a fabric that we're going to want to match across the front of our shirt, our right side and our left side. If we look at our original pattern, you can see that the center front line is marked very clearly. That center front line is going to be exactly the same on our right front and left fronts of our shirt. If we bring the original pattern over to our shirt and line up the center front with the button line of the right side, you can see that it's the same line of pattern on our left side. So if we're buttoning the shirt, the pattern is perfectly matched across the front because our center fronts were perfectly lined up when we cut our fabric. When you're cutting your fabric, you may also be cutting a pocket. Now on this particular shirt, I chose not to put a pocket on. But if you were putting a pocket on and you wanted to match the pattern, you could determine your pocket position, either your own preferred pocket position or the pocket position that's recommended on the pattern itself. And you can see where the design motifs need to go on the pocket. For example, this position has these 4 flowers evenly spaced on that rectangular pocket. Then I would simply pick up the pattern piece, bring it to my fabric, place it where I need it to go, and cut my fabric. Okay, I have my pattern picked, I have my fabric, I'm ready to sew.